Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I know a lot of you can use out there, and that is attention to detail.
Ooh, attention to detail.
It's a big one. We've all heard how important it is, especially if you are, someone who's prepping for job interviews. I know a lot of our listeners are out there in the
Yeah.
world doing that.
Yeah.
And what we're diving into today is an article that is all about how interviewers use these kind of tricky questions to really figure out just how detail-oriented you are.
Right.
But here's the thing. This article goes a little bit deeper,
Okay.
and it also talks about how perfectionism,
Mm-hmm.
which we always think of as like a good thing when it
Yeah.
comes to details, can actually backfire on you.
Yeah. It's a really interesting kind of two sides to that coin.
Yeah. So we're going to have to really unpack this a little bit. And, luckily I have an expert here with me today.
We'll figure it out.
So maybe we should start with just like breaking down why attention to detail is such a big deal in the first place. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just about being neat and tidy, right?
No, not at all. I mean, think about it this way. Being detail-oriented can make you so incredibly efficient.
Okay.
You're not wasting time redoing things, or you're not missing crucial information,
Right.
and that makes you more resourceful.
Right.
You can get things done with what you have.
Right.
And you're organized.
Right.
You're that organized person that everyone wants on their team.
It's like a superpower
It is.
that saves everyone time and headaches.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we're talking about this, but the interesting thing is this kind of superpower looks different depending on what your job is.
Right.
And the article gives a great example.
Okay.
Like, imagine a career counselor. They need attention to detail,
Yes.
but it's all about like listening closely,
Right.
noticing if their client kind of hesitates when they're talking about a certain career path.
It's those little subtleties.
Right. And that tiny detail could actually reveal like a whole hidden concern they need to address.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whereas an architect might be like laser focused on the exact measurements of a building plan.
Right.
So it's the same skill, but a totally different way of applying it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that leads us to how it's tested in job interviews.
Okay. So let's get into these interview questions.
Okay.
Because the article lists a few
Mhm.
that seem very simple at first.
Right.
But they're actually designed to reveal a lot about how you think about details.
Okay.
One that stood out to me was, do you prefer the big picture or small details?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Seems like a trap.
It is a trap. Yeah. A savvy interviewer knows that attention to detail isn't about obsessing over the small stuff.
Right.
It's understanding how all those small pieces fit into the big picture.
Okay.
And how to balance the two. So a good answer to that question would reflect that.
Okay. So if you just say, oh, I'm all about the details, you're missing the point.
Yeah, you're missing the point. You have to connect the dots for them. Show them you can see the forest for the trees.
I like that. Okay.
But you can also zoom in when you need to.
Okay. What about this other question? Because they list a few. How do you limit distractions in the workplace?
Ooh, that's a good one too. That's a really good one. And again, it's not about having a right answer.
Right.
It's about your approach,
Okay.
how you think about the problem.
Right. Because everyone gets distracted sometimes.
Everyone does. It's more about your strategies.
Right. Exactly. But some of these questions get really tricky. Like one that I was like, "Ooh, this is a tough one,"
Okay.
was describing a time you found your manager's error.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yikes.
That one is all about assessing your judgment
Right.
and your communication skills. Can you be detail-oriented enough to spot an error, but also tactful enough to say something without, causing a big scene?
Right.
I mean, it's a high-pressure situation, and how you answer that question really reveals a lot about your professionalism. Okay, so we've kind of got the interview questions down, but the article also hints that, like, interviewers are judging you even before you get to those questions. Like,
Yeah.
they're watching you from the moment you walk in the door.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
even before that, they're looking at your resume.
Oh, okay.
That's your first impression.
Right.
And a messy resume, one that's got typos and inconsistencies,
Oh, yeah.
is basically waving a big red flag that says, I don't pay attention to details.
So that perfectly formatted, error-free resume, it's not just about looking good. It's
Well,
like a test in itself.
It is. It is a test. And once you're in the room, they're watching.
Mm-hmm.
Are you on time? Are you listening? Are you making eye contact? These might seem like small things,
Yeah.
but they all play into it. They show how you approach everything.
Wow, so they're really analyzing every move you make. Okay, so we've got to be on our A game even before the interview
You
starts.
do. You do.
But let's talk a little bit more about this whole perfectionism paradox
Okay.
that you mentioned earlier.
Right.
Because it's not always a good thing to be a perfectionist, right?
It isn't. We tend to think of perfectionism as this positive trait, and in a lot of ways it is, right? I mean, striving for excellence,
Right.
being thorough, that's all good. But when you take it too far, that's when it becomes counterproductive.
Okay.
You might get bogged down, miss deadlines, and just stress yourself out over things that don't really matter that much in the long run.
So how do you avoid falling into that trap
Right.
while still, maintaining that good attention to detail?
It's all about finding a balance.
Okay.
And the article gives a couple of good strategies.
I'm all ears.
Well, one is setting those clear milestones and checkpoints for your work.
Okay.
So that way you're not just striving for perfect, you're breaking things down into smaller steps.
Right.
And you're checking your progress along the way.
So it's about creating a structure to kind of keep your perfectionism in check.
Exactly. Exactly. Another one is learning to prioritize.
Okay.
Because not every detail deserves the same level of attention.
That makes sense. So we've got to learn to pick our battles when it comes to details.
Yes, you do. And you know what? That's something that we can all benefit from.
Yeah.
Whether we're prepping for an interview or tackling a project at work,
Right.
or even just trying to organize our lives.
That's a good point.
We all need to be a little more detail-oriented.
For sure. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about why attention to detail is so important. We've talked about how interviewers try to trick you with those sneaky questions.
Yeah, those sneaky questions.
And we've even talked about how perfectionism can actually be a bad thing if you take it too far. So it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
But you know what? We're only just getting started. We're going to dive even deeper.
Yes, we are.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
Talking about, why attention to detail is such a valuable skill, how interviewers use those sneaky questions to kind of test for it,
Right.
and even how too much perfectionism can kind of backfire.
Right.
It's a lot to take in. Yeah, you know what? For all of you listening out there, how can we actually use this?
Right. That's the question.
How can we apply it?
Well, the good thing about this is that these are principles that work not just in job interviews, but also just in your career, in your life
Yeah.
as a whole.
So this isn't just for people on the job hunt.
No.
This is something we can all benefit from.
Absolutely. Imagine you're at work, and you've got a big project you're trying to organize.
Right.
Being able to prioritize those tasks, allocate resources effectively,
Yeah.
catch those little errors before they become big problems.
Right.
That's all attention to detail.
It's like even planning a trip. You need that same kind of mindset.
Oh,
Or-
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
To make sure everything goes smoothly.
To make sure you didn't miss anything.
Yeah. And don't forget those relationships.
Oh, yeah?
I mean, actively listening to your partner, remembering those important dates, noticing the little things that make them happy.
Right.
All of that contributes to a stronger connection.
It really does. I never thought about it that way, but it's so true. Attention to detail shows that you care.
It does. It does. And so, it's really a skill that enriches every part of your life.
I'll admit, though, I'm not always the most detail-oriented person.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel like I'm more of a big-picture thinker. So does that mean, I'm doomed?
Not at all.
Okay, good.
One of the best things from this article is that it really emphasizes that attention to detail, it's not necessarily something you're born with.
Okay.
It's a skill.
Okay.
It's something you can develop, strengthen over time, just like learning a language or playing an instrument.
But so even if you weren't born with, a magnifying glass,
Yeah,
you can train yourself.
you can.
When
Absolutely.
you see those little details.
And the article gives some really practical techniques that you can start using today,
Okay.
like checklists.
Oh, checklists. Huge fan of checklists.
Right. Checklists are great for making sure you haven't missed anything,
Yeah.
that you're following all the steps.
They just take the pressure off?
Absolutely, they do. Another thing, setting reminders,
Okay.
whether it's your phone, sticky notes. I mean, those little things can be lifesavers
Right.
when you're juggling a million things.
Yeah, creating a safety net
Yeah,
for your brain so you don't have to remember it all.
absolutely. And probably one of the simplest but most effective things is just taking the time to review your work
Right.
before you hit send,
Right.
before you submit it. That final check can help you catch those typos, the inconsistencies, the things you missed.
The little things, yeah.
Yeah, that could have been easily overlooked.
It's funny. We rush to get things done, and then we make those careless mistakes.
Right.
But taking that extra time, it's so worth it.
It is. It is. And, the more you do this,
Yeah.
the more you practice these techniques, you become habits.
Right.
You're training your brain to be more detail-oriented.
That's so cool. I feel like I'm learning so much. Like, I have a whole new set of tools
I'm glad to hear that.
to, be more focused.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the details. And speaking of tools, there was one last point in the article that I found really thought-provoking.
Oh, okay. What is it?
They talk about this debate about whether attention to detail is something that can be learned or if it's something that some people are just naturally better at.
Oh, it's like the nature versus nurture
Exactly. Exactly.
applied to attention to detail.
Right.
I like that.
Are we born with it?
Right.
Or is it something we develop? Interesting. The article doesn't have an answer, but it's certainly something to think about.
It's true. It makes you wonder if someday they're going to find like an attention to detail gene.
Right.
But regardless, the good news is that we can all improve, right?
We can.
It just takes effort.
It does. Awareness, effort, and a willingness to,
Yeah.
embrace those little details that make all the difference.
I love that. It's so empowering. It means we're not stuck
No.
with however we were, when we were born. We can actually change it.
You can.
This has been so insightful. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Like, I feel like we've gained a whole new appreciation for the power of these small things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's those little things that have a big impact.
And on that note,
Okay.
I think it's time to kind of wrap up our discussion
Okay.
with the final thought-provoking question for everyone listening.
Okay, I like it. Hit me.
We've talked about how valuable this can be, but I'm wondering, is there a point where it becomes too much? Like, can you be so focused on the details
Right.
that it actually hurts your work or even, like, your well-being?
It's a great question. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about with perfectionism.
Okay.
If you're so obsessed with every little detail,
Yeah.
you could miss deadlines. You could overwork yourself. And you might even lose sight of the bigger picture.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's like that saying, you can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
You're so zoomed in, you lose all perspective.
You do.
So I guess the key is knowing when to step back and be like, okay, is this level of detail really necessary?
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Right.
Where you're being thorough and accurate,
Mm-hmm.
but also efficient
Right.
and realistic.
Yeah.
And that balance might be different, depending on the task, your role, even your personality.
So there's no magic formula.
Yeah.
It's more about just being self-aware
Absolutely.
and honest about, what your tendencies are.
Yeah. If, you tend to get bogged down in the details.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to pull yourself back.
Right. Or if you're more of a big picture person, you need to remind yourself, like, okay, wait, did I double check this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that self-awareness, that's something you can develop.
Okay.
Maybe try keeping track of how much time you spend on things.
Okay.
And if you're constantly going over your estimates,
Yeah.
that might be a sign that you're getting too lost in the weeds.
This has been so fascinating.
I'm glad.
We started out talking about interview questions,
Right.
and now we're talking about, like, self-awareness and finding balance in our lives. It really applies to so much more than just the job hunt.
I think so too. It really does. And I think understanding, attention to detail, the good and the bad,
Mm-hmm.
can help you be a better worker, a better planner,
Yeah,
and just a more mindful person in general.
I agree. So to everyone listening out there, embrace those details.
Yes.
But don't let them rule you.
Right.
Find that sweet spot, and remember, it's something you can always work on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.